My name is Ethan, and until recently, I thought I had my life all planned out. At 33, I had spent over a decade working alongside my father, John, in our family's diesel mechanics workshop. That place had been my second home since childhood. I loved spending weekends there, tinkering with engines, knowing I would one day take over. To prepare, I went to college, earned a degree in automobile engineering, and brought my expertise back to modernize the business. At 23, I joined the workshop full-time. It was a small operation then. Just my dad, 2 part-time mechanics, and a single truck. Over the next 10 years, I poured everything into that place. With my dad's mechanical know-how and my strategic ideas, we grew to 35 employees, expanded our fleet to 15 vehicles, and saw our revenue skyrocket from $250,000 to nearly $7 million last year. I wasn't just working a job, I was building a legacy. Then there was my older brother, Andrew. He's 39 now, an accountant in the city. Unlike me, he never cared for the workshop, often mocking me for wanting to follow in Dad's footsteps. Growing up, he seemed embarrassed by our father's trade, and while it never bothered Dad, I couldn't ignore how he favored Andrew. Maybe it was because Andrew had a rough patch in his teens. When he got pneumonia at 15, Dad spent months by his side. Their bond grew unshakable, while mine withered in its shadow. Over the years, I noticed the favoritism. One time, I won a major academic award in high school, but Dad skipped the ceremony to take Andrew for ice cream. I told myself it didn't matter. Action spoke louder than words, right? And Dad choosing me to help transform the business had to mean something. I was wrong. Last year, everything changed. My parents' marriage had been rocky for years, but Dad's announcement of a divorce still hit me hard. Soon after, he started dating Gina, a woman just 3 years younger than me. While polite, she seemed more interested in Dad's attention than in our family. Their relationship drove a further wedge between us. Then, 5 months ago, Dad invited Andrew and me to dinner. I assumed it was about his retirement or a new direction for the company. Instead, he dropped a bombshell. I've decided that Andrew should inherit the workshop. I froze. Andrew? The same Andrew who never set foot in the workshop unless he needed a favor. Who didn't even want it? My stomach turned as Dad justified his choice. Andrew had a family to provide for, while I wasn't married yet. As if my dedication and sacrifices meant nothing, I kept my voice steady. Dad, I helped you build this business. How can you just hand it over to Andrew? Dad didn't flinch. You'll still have your job. You can work under Andrew. It felt like a punch to the gut. I turned to Andrew, hoping for some protest, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. That hurt almost as much as Dad's betrayal. I left that night feeling hollow. For days, I wrestled with the weight of my father's decision. Then, clarity hit me. I couldn't stay. The workshop wasn't just a job, it was my life's work. And I refused to work under someone who neither respected the business nor the people who kept it running. I confided in Mom. She listened, anger flashing in her eyes. You've earned that business, she said. But maybe it's time to build something of your own. Her words stuck with me. I had always seen the workshop as my future, but maybe I didn't need Dad's approval to succeed. So I made a decision. I wasn't going to fight for scraps of recognition. I started reaching out to clients, the ones I had brought into the business over the years. The response was overwhelming. Many pledged their support, and within weeks, I had the foundation to start my own company. The hardest part was handing in my resignation. When I placed the letter on Dad's desk, he looked up, confused. You're quitting? Why? I met his gaze. Because I can't work here anymore. You made your choice, Dad. Now I'm making mine. His face darkened. You're being selfish. The family business needs you. I almost laughed at the irony. The family business? I shook my head. You mean Andrew's business. You made it clear I don't have a place here anymore. Without waiting for a response, I walked out for the last time. Relief washed over me. I was finally free. Starting from scratch wasn't easy, but my loyal clients followed, and soon, my new company was thriving. Some of Dad's employees, frustrated with Andrew's mismanagement, asked to join me. Meanwhile, the old workshop spiraled downward. Clients left in droves. frustrated by Andrew's incompetence. Rumors spread that Dad had to sell the business after Gina left him, taking what little money he had left. Then came the desperate calls, first from Dad, then Andrew. I ignored them until one message finally broke me. "I hope you're happy watching your family fall apart." That was it. I blocked them both. For the first time in years, I felt light. No more guilt, no more expectations. Just the freedom to build my own future. With time, my business flourished. Maya, my girlfriend, was my rock, always reminding me of my worth. One night, as we talked about our future, I blurted out the question I'd been holding back. "Maya, will you marry me?" Her eyes widened before she broke into a smile. "Of course." Our wedding was small, intimate, and filled with love. Mom beamed with pride, and for the first time, I felt whole. I had built something for myself, something no one could take away. Then, one day, a letter arrived from Dad. "I'm proud of you, Ethan. Even if I didn't show it when it mattered most, I always knew you had what it took." Forgiveness didn't come immediately, but it planted a seed. Over time, I learned that letting go didn't mean forgetting. It meant freeing myself. As I sat in my office, mapping out our next expansion, I realized something. The greatest act of self-preservation isn't fighting for a place where you aren't valued. It's walking away and finding your own path. And in walking away, I had finally found myself. Story 2. I'm Janice, and I'm 20 years old. Making it on my own had always been my goal. Everything seemed to be coming together when I was accepted to college on a full scholarship. My tuition was fully paid by the scholarship, but I still needed a place to live. My mother then thought of what appeared to be the ideal remedy. One evening as we sat in our kitchen, she said, "I've been thinking, do you remember the flat your grandma gave me 4 years ago? How about renting it? I'll provide you a competitive pricing, far less than what you would spend elsewhere in that region." I looked into it, and she wasn't telling lies. She was requesting rent that was about half of what comparable flats were charging. Even though I knew I'd have to get a job to pay for it, it felt obvious. A valid leasing agreement must be signed. Pulling out paperwork she had prepared, Mom persisted. "I always follow the book." I obtained work at a cafe close to university in less than a week. Although it wasn't very glamorous, I was able to make ends meet between job hours and school. Although I was usually fatigued, it felt fantastic to be managing things alone. My daily schedule was straightforward yet rigorous. Get up and attend courses, go directly to work, arrive home late. I studied till I lost the ability to see, do it again. I was making things work, even if it wasn't easy. At least I believed I was, up until that Thursday night, when everything was different. I have a clear memory of it. I just got off a really difficult shift at the cafe. Before starting my schoolwork, all I wanted to do was lay down on my couch and perhaps watch some pointless TV. However, I froze in my tracks as I opened the door to my apartment and saw my sister Anna sprawled on my couch as if she owned the space. She was utterly relaxed as she browsed through her phone as 2 big luggage sat next to her. "Why are you here?" Still standing at the doorway, I asked. She looked up from her phone just a little. Hi, you and I are moving in together." "It's okay," Mom said. I took out my phone right away and contacted my mother. I waited for her to pull me up, my hands trembling. "What's happening on, Mom?" "She's moving in here, according to Anna." "Will she cover her response's rent?" Like a smack across the face. "Are you insanely envious? What sort of foolish inquiries are you making?" "Anna isn't paying her rent, of course. She will live there for free, and you will continue to pay what you have been paying." "What?" "It's unfair. She should cover half the rent if she is residing here." My mom's speech became abrasive. That was her tone when she refused to accept any disagreement. "Janice, pay close attention to me. I'm the owner of the flat, and I make the financial decisions. You may leave at any time if you don't like it." I looked at local apartment postings after my mother's ultimatum, but everything was much above my budget. Thus, I swallowed my pride and came to terms with the circumstances. Living with my sister was like having a storm as a roommate, since she had never learned to be respectful of other people. Lights were burning in the living room, kitchen, hallway, and other vacant rooms every morning when I woke up. Every night, she would leave them on. "Please remember to switch off the lights when you leave a room, Anna." I tried to speak at a level voice when I asked one morning. The bill for electricity. Stop being so stiff, please. Without even glancing up from her phone, she interrupted me. The lights were only the beginning, so it's not really that big of an issue. Her restroom habits were the true terror. Anna would spend literally hours locked in there, taking countless showers and talking on the phone with her pals. My worry was accompanied by the sound of flowing water. I heard her laughing and splashing through the bathroom door one evening as I was getting ready for a test. For over 2 hours, the water had been running. "Hello, Anna." I knocked on the door and yelled, "You've been in there forever. Are you aware of the amount of water you're wasting?" Her voice returned, hushed but gratingly happy. "Calm down, sis. Today is my spa day. I can do whatever I want," Mom says. I withdrew to my room and tried to concentrate on my textbooks, while mentally estimating the likely expense of these spa days. At last, the water stopped flowing. On the day the utility bill arrived, 3 hours had gone by. I almost passed out. It was twice as much as what I typically pay. I was worried how I was going to pay for this on top of my other bills, as I stood in the kitchen and looked at the figures. I addressed Anna that night. She was lying down on the sofa. She was sitting on the coffee table with her feet up, loudly viewing movies on her phone. I held up the paper and said, "We need to talk about the utility bills. Since you moved here, they have doubled. You should be more mindful of how much power and water you use." Or what? With a sneer on her lips, she glanced up at last. "More. You'll have to look for another place to reside." She took notice of that. Her eyes narrowed as she straightened her posture. "Excuse me?" said Ma'am explicitly. "Here I am free to do as I like. Remember, you're meant to serve me." That was Mom's statement. I felt something crack within of me. Everything I had been suppressing, including my aggravation and the injustice of the situation, came rushing out. "Gather your belongings." My voice was unnaturally calm as I spoke. "Leave now. This residence isn't yours." She screamed and leaped to her feet. "It's my responsibility to pay for it." "And you're heading out now?" I asked. We were at a standstill for a while. Anna then began packing her belongings into her luggage. The entire time, she swore beneath her breath. While packing, she banged over objects, slammed doors, and made as much noise as she could. She finally turned to face me one more time, spit out, and dragged her baggage to the door. "This is something you will regret." Then she slammed the door so forcefully that the windows shook as she rushed out. My phone began to ring just as I was beginning to catch my breath. The screen showed Mom's name. Even though I knew what was coming, I responded with a trembling hand. "What are you doing, in your opinion?" I had to keep the phone away from my ear since her voice was so loud. "To throw your sister out. Who do you think you are?" "Mom!" She has been silenced. "You were not entitled." She was essentially yelling. "Right now. Gather your belongings and leave. Do you hear me? I'm going to double your rent unless you leave. You have an option." I finally let out the rage that had been simmering inside of me for weeks. "What do you know?" I retorted, my voice shaking with rage. "I would rather pay 5 times as much somewhere else than deal with this absurd circumstance for another minute." I hung up before she could answer. I grabbed my luggage from beneath the bed and barged into my bedroom. I began tossing clothes into it without even folding them. I gathered my belongings around the flat, as my vision was obscured by angry tears. I started taking out my textbooks as soon as I reached the bookcase. My irate motions caused them to slip in my hands, and they were uncomfortable and heavy. I slammed the bookshelf door shut with all my strength. Frustrated, it happened at that moment. On top of the bookshelf, a number of heavy volumes that I had not seen fell, striking me in the head. Simply ideal. I looked at the books that had fallen and touched my head. I saw something flutter to the ground at that moment. One of them had dropped a piece of paper out. I stooped to pick it up, supposing it was just a misplaced bookmark or an old receipt. But my heart stopped as I unfurled it. The top of the plainly photocopied legal paper was still readily readable. The words, "Last Will and Testament," were bolded. There was my grandmother's name and the date of her death, which was only a few months away. As I read through it, my hands began to shake. It was in black and white there. My mother and Anna received money from my grandma. Additionally, I had been paying rent for this flat, which had been handed to me. As memories flooded back, I fell to the ground, the while still gripped in my shaking hands. Now, like parts of a puzzle I had been too blind to see, everything began to make terrible sense. I could still hear my mother's voice from 4 years ago, immediately following Grandma's funeral. I recalled listening my mom make her news while seated in our living room with family members. Mom had told me she had left everything to me. She spoke in a steady, persuasive voice. All the money and all the property. She wanted everything to be handled by me. No one questioned her since she had glanced around the room and met everyone's eyes with such honesty. I recalled hesitantly raising my hand, like a schoolgirl hesitant to pose a foolish query. But why didn't our grandmother give us anything, Mom? To myself and Anna. I will never forget the look she gave me, that mix of sympathy and annoyance. These things are tricky, Janice. We must honor the decision made by your grandma. You just must come to terms with it. Embrace it. Now those words have a different impact. In the months that followed, I saw Anna abruptly start wearing high-end clothing and the newest iPhone. As a mother-daughter bonding vacation, Mom and Anna went shopping in Paris and Milan. While I stayed at home and worked a summer job at the neighborhood grocery shop, they termed it a 2-week tour of Europe. I now saw why they were spending so much money on their shopping trips, their trip to Europe, and all of the pricey presents they had given Anna, which had been her inheritance. They had spent money directly in front of me, presumably giggling at the fact that I never challenged it. What about this apartment? My flat. They had not just kept it from me. I had to pay the price for it. Rent, utilities, everything, every month. Living in a location that was legally mine, I've been working non-stop at that cafe, making the most of every dollar. I felt like I was slapped in the face by the lease agreement's harsh irony. Mom's voice was hardly audible. Janice, we must accomplish things correctly. I have extremely specific tastes in these things. Everything must be appropriately filed and documented. My angry chuckle reverberated around the deserted flat, especially in regard to documentation. That is, until she revealed to her daughter that her grandma had bequeathed her an entire apartment. She had somehow forgotten that small detail. As I gave it more attention, additional memories came to mind, each with a darker new significance. When I handed over money for an apartment that was properly mine, my mother would lecture me about responsibility and remind me that rent was due. The way she would grin as I thanked her for the great rent offer. She also threatened to evict me from my own flat a few hours earlier. I carefully took pictures of each page of the will with my trembling hands. Before sending it to my mother, I checked that every word was readable and clear. The message displayed as sent right away, and 2 blue check marks followed a few seconds later. She had witnessed it. I gazed at the screen of my phone, observing the appearance and disappearance of those 3 dots, show up and then vanish. My mother, who is normally so quick to respond and always prepared with an answer for anything, was speechless. She was sitting there, most likely at her kitchen table, trying desperately to find out how to spin this, and I could practically see her. The dots appeared and disappeared like a panicked Morse code at 20:10:30. Each time they emerged, I stiffened, waiting for her answer. I was grimly satisfied every time they vanished. Allow her to wriggle. My phone didn't ring until over an hour had passed. I inhaled deeply before responding. Janice, dear. In an attempt to smooth over an issue, she employed a tone that was falsely tranquil. It's not what you believe. Really. Because I believe that to be precisely what I believe. As like I hadn't said anything, she went on. I've been meaning to tell you about this for so long. I simply couldn't find the ideal time. However, you may now have the flat since you learned about it. You own it. Let's go on and put this whole awful situation behind us. I gave a hard chuckle. Make a new beginning. You want me to just forget everything? Don't remember that I gave you Grandma's will. Ignore the fact that only a few hours ago, you attempted to evict me from my apartment. Forget that I have been paying you rent on an apartment that is truly mine for over 2 years. Please, Janice. No, Mother. I want my money back in full. I've paid you rent each and every time. I want everything to return. The other end of the line was silent for a time. When she resumed her speech, the softness was gone from her voice. You wouldn't risk it. Would I not? You'd see your own mother after everything you've done to me, and we've done so much for you. You mean you attempted to evict me when I refused to allow Emma freeload here, took my inheritance and forced me to pay rent on my own property? I would dare then. After hanging up, I accessed my banking app and began looking over my transaction history with shaking hands. 23 months' worth of carefully recorded rent payments. Mom had often complimented me on my ability to keep records. In a strange turn of events, I took out my emergency savings book and began making calculations without having to pay rent. In fact, I could afford to employ a skilled lawyer. Since the day I came into this apartment, I've been keeping track of every transaction, bank statement, and piece of paper pertaining to it. With its dark oak furnishings and walls covered with legal texts, the law office was calm and polished. I sat across from Miss Roberts and watched as she went over everything I could locate, including the will, my rental agreements, and bank records that showed all of my payments. She looked up from the papers and said, "This is pretty simple." Her face was a mix of professional interest and sympathy. "It's obvious that your grandma gave you this flat in her will. It was illegal for your mother to demand rent from you or anybody else." I bent over. "So what can I do?" She pulled out a legal pad and stated, "You're entitled to compensation. In addition to the 23 months that you have been paying rent, your mother rented it out to other people for the 2 years prior." The following hour was devoted to calculations. Miss Roberts was meticulous, dissecting each month in detail. The rent her mother collected from past tenants, in addition to the regular rent payments you made. She added columns and wrote numbers while accounting for the then current market rates. When she finally pushed the paper toward me, more calculations ensued. I had to blink twice at the amount $58,740, she continued. "For simplicity, we'll round it to $60,000. It made me feel a little lightheaded. "We could also pursue interest charges," she said after nodding. "Your parents have basically been utilizing an interest-free loan of your money for over 4 years. We could calculate standard interest rates." "No," I interrupted. "Just the rent money, that's sufficient." After finalizing the paperwork, I called my mother from the law office parking lot. My voice was steadier than I expected. "We must talk, Mom. Can you come to the apartment tomorrow? Bring the property documents." There was a long pause before she agreed. The next morning I heard her key in the lock. She came in looking nervous, clutching a manila envelope. "I brought the ownership papers," she said, trying to smile. "Everything you need to change the apartment's ownership is here. I've already had them prepared." She spread the documents on the kitchen table, the same table where she'd made me sign that rental agreement so many months ago. I didn't miss the irony. "Janice, honey," she said softly, pushing the papers toward me. "I know I made a terrible mistake. I'm asking for your forgiveness. Please don't be angry with me. We can put this behind us," and I cut her off by sliding another document across the table. The demand letter my lawyer had prepared. "You have 2 weeks to pay back the $60,000 she took from me." The moment my mother finished reading the demand letter, all pretense of remorse vanished. She leaped up from her chair with such force it crashed to the floor, and then the screaming began. "You ungrateful little witch," she shrieked. "How dare you do this to your own mother?" The roar bounced off the wall so forcefully that I think I saw pieces of plaster dust drop down from the ceiling. The neighbors must have believed someone was being killed. I forced myself to stay calm. "You can scream all you want, Mom. It doesn't change anything. Either you pay what you owe me or I'll file a lawsuit. Think about it. Fraud charges, legal fees, your reputation in the community. You have an option." She stormed out of the apartment, slamming the door so hard the pictures rattled on the walls. I could hear her stomping down the hallway, still screaming. I thought that would be the end of it for the day. I was mistaken. The call started coming within the hour. First, it was my father. "How could you do this to us?" he demanded. "After everything we've done for you, you're an ungrateful and scrupulous child." I let out a bitter laugh. Ungrateful and scrupulous. That's rich, coming from parents who tricked their own daughter into paying rent for an apartment she owned. Where was your conscience when you were cashing my rent checks every month? Something about loyalty to family came out of his mouth, but I hung up. Next came Anna. "You're going to ruin everything." She let out a cry. "If Mom and Dad have to give you all that money, they won't be able to pay for my college. Do you want it that way? To destroy my future?" "Your future isn't my problem, Anna. Maybe you could try what I did. Get a job, work hard, save money. Novel concept. I am aware." The calls kept coming. Mom would alternate between screaming and crying. Dad would lecture about family, duty and respect. Anna would guilt trip and manipulate. They took turns tag teaming me from morning till night. Sometimes they'd call from different phones when I blocked their numbers. After a week of this, my father called with a different tone. "We need more time," he said, his voice heavy. "Can you give us a month instead of 2 weeks?" I considered it. The lawyer had advised me that a month was still reasonable. All right, 1 month, not a day more. The next 4 weeks were quiet. Suspiciously quiet. No more calls, no more guilt trips, no more screaming. I almost started to worry. They had a plan. But exactly 1 month after my mother's meltdown in my kitchen, I checked my bank account. There it was, $60,000 transferred in full. It's been 3 months since the money appeared in my account. My dad, Carol, phoned me last week. She's always been the family gossip, but for once, I was glad for her urge to share knowledge. "Your parents had to take out a bank loan to pay you back," she told me, her voice a mixture of concern and fascination. "They're really struggling with the payments now." I sat on my couch, my grandmother's couch, listening as she continued. "Anna's not in college anymore. They can't afford the tuition." She paused, probably waiting for me to show some sign of guilt or remorse. "She's just sitting at home complaining about how you ruined her life." I thought about Anna, who had never worked a day in her life, who had always expected everything to be handed to her. Maybe it's time she learned to stand on her own feet. I said that's when a recollection hit me. So clear. It felt like watching a movie. The day of the well, reading. I'd been getting ready to go with Mom to the notary's office. I would dress in my finest black gown, attempting to project an air of maturity and responsibility. Then Mom came into my room looking worried. "Anna's sick. She'd said she's running a fever. You need to stay home with her." I remember feeling disappointed, but accepting it as just another sacrifice for my sister. Now I understand, and I probably wasn't sick at all. It was just another lie in a long line of deceptions, another manipulation. Why my mother stole my inheritance is not the question that haunts me at night. I understand greed. What I can't figure out is how she got away with it so easily. I asked Aunt Carol about the notary and she didn't know much, but her theory makes sense. The notary probably just took my mother's word that she would share the will with the family. Maybe Mom even brought a stack of documents, making it look like she was taking everything home to show us. How many small moments now feel tainted is the worst part. Mom always complimented me on my financial responsibility. Was she laughing inside when she insisted on that formal lease agreement? Was she proud of her cleverness? Did she and Dad discuss their deception over dinner? Did they congratulate themselves on their perfect plan? I still live in Grandma's apartment. My flat. The place feels different now that I'm not paying rent on something I already owned. I've started saving the money that used to go to Mom every month. Sometimes I look at my bank account and smile, thinking about how different things are now. The cafe where I work offered me a promotion to assistant manager last week. Some people might think I don't need the job anymore now that I'm not paying rent, but I've learned the value of being independent, of having my own money that nobody can take from me. My phone still lights up sometimes with their names. Mom, Dad, Anna. I blocked their numbers, but they keep trying from new ones. I delete their voicemails without listening. What could they possibly say? Apologies. We stole your inheritance. Sorry we made you pay rent on your own property. Apologies. We only got caught because some books fell on your head. Most days I'm okay. I go to classes, work my shifts at the cafe, study in the evening. I've redecorated a bit, trying to make the apartment feel more like my own space and less like a crime scene. But sometimes, usually late at night, the anger comes back. Not just at the theft, but at the years of lies. The casual cruelty of making me think my grandmother hadn't cared enough to leave me anything. My therapist says it's normal to feel this way. She says it's not just about the money or the apartment. It's about trust and family and betrayal. She's helping me work through it, teaching me ways to stay calm and balanced when the memories threaten to overwhelm me. I've started a new tradition. Every Sunday morning, I sit in Grandma's old reading chair by the window, drinking coffee from her favorite mug. I think about her, about how she wanted me to have this place, about how she trusted me to take care of it. In those moments, I feel close to her again, like maybe some part of her knows that the truth finally came out. Story 3. I never imagined that I would be sharing this tale, yet here I am. I'm Piper, and when my life completely fell apart, I was 24 years old. I had a partner, my own leased apartment, a solid job as a manager at a respectable firm. and what most people would consider a very excellent arrangement back then. Even though Jake and I had only been dating for 6 months, it felt like we had known each other for ages. I was completely smitten. He looked to fit all the requirements and was pleasant and accomplished. We spent hours discussing everything and nothing while preparing for the future. I felt as though I was in a dream as things became more serious. It's probably time for you to meet my family. One evening, as we were snuggled together on my sofa and watching a dull Netflix program, I informed him, "You will be loved by them. You're so flawless that even my sister will have to acknowledge it." Emma, my 22-year-old sister, had recently received her college degree. She continued to live with our parents while she considered her options. Despite our 2-year age difference, we had always been close as children, but recently she had become aloof. I blamed it on her job search struggles and post-graduation stress. My family supper was scheduled for the next weekend. I wanted everything to be flawless, so I spent hours getting ready. My mother was beaming with pleasure as soon as Jake entered the house with the wine and flowers he had bought. Mom pulled me aside in the kitchen and said, "Oh, Piper, he's just nice, so polite, and quite attractive as well." From her spot at the counter, I saw Emma roll her eyes and give a little snort, but I chose to ignore it. She was probably simply envious of my well-organized life while she was still getting her bearings. I couldn't have asked for a nicer evening. Because they both enjoy golf, Dad and Jake became close. Even Emma's attitude started to soften by dessert, and Mom couldn't stop complimenting his professional accomplishments. Mom gave me a strong embrace as we were leaving and said in a whisper, "Don't let this one get away, sweetheart." In a matter of weeks, Jake and I were discussing getting married. The suggestion wasn't conventional. The talk simply kind of flowed. Of course. Over supper one evening, in 6 months we could accomplish it. Reaching across the table to hold my hand, he made a suggestion. Not very fancy. Only close friends and relatives. When we told my parents, they were ecstatic. They insisted on paying half of the wedding costs right away, with Jake's parents contributing the other half. Throughout the entire talk, Emma sat silently, nibbling at her meal, and occasionally making these tiny puffing noises that nobody seemed to hear. Wedding preparations took up the following 5 months. Cake samples, venue visits, floral selections, and many vendor meetings took up every free moment. I frequently stayed late at work to meet with our wedding organizer since I was exhausting myself trying to juggle my career and wedding planning. It began like any other Tuesday. I was scheduled to work late again to finalize the reception timing with our organizer after meeting with the florist in the morning. However, I started to have splitting headaches about 2 p.m. After glancing at me, my supervisor sent me home. I thought I'd surprise Jake. I thought we might order takeout and have a nice evening together because he typically worked from home on Tuesdays. Maybe he might help me with some of the wedding duties that were building up. The apartment was silent as I unlocked the door, but I heard muffled sounds coming from our bedroom. Jake was on a work call, I thought. For better sound quality, he frequently brought them inside. When I opened that door, I witnessed something I will never forget. Emma and Jake got caught up in our sheets. In our bed are my sister and my fiancé. Time paused. The world shrank to that one instant. That one picture would be permanently etched in my mind. Emma didn't even have the grace to appear embarrassed, as though I were interrupting something insignificant. She simply glanced at me with an almost bored attitude. "Piper." Jake began to get to his feet. "I can explain, baby." Without a word, something inside of me exploded. I went to the closet, took their clothing, and strode directly to our balcony on the 3rd story. Piper made the deal. It was already too late when Jake called out. Their clothing was strewn all over the parking lot below, and I had already tossed everything over the railing with grim enjoyment. "Leave now." My voice was unnaturally calm as I spoke. I had to cover her bed with another sheet since all of her clothing were now covering the 3 stories of asphalt below. If I hadn't felt like I was dying inside, it would have been comical to see her shuffle toward the door wearing nothing but Egyptian cotton, while attempting to keep her dignity. I slammed the door shut as soon as they were gone and slipped down to sit on the floor, collapsing against it. How long I sat there attempting to process what had just transpired is beyond me. My phone rang as the sun was sinking. The screen showed Mom's name. I felt a brief sense of relaxation. She must have been phoning to reassure me that everything would be well. I was completely mistaken. "How could you treat your sister in such a degrading manner?" She gave a hiss. She was forced to leave under a sheet as soon as I responded, tossing her clothing out the window. What were you contemplating? What I was hearing was unbelievable. What was I thinking? What was she contemplating? My fiancé and her were sharing a bed. Piper, you're so theatrical all the time. That's precisely why, Mother. I interrupted her, speaking louder than I actually felt. The wedding has been called off. Tomorrow I'll get in touch with the merchants. No, you won't. Her tone was unusually calm until she broke it. The wedding is still going on. I discussed it with Jake's parents along with your father. We also talked to Emma and Jake. The wedding will go according to schedule. You'll be replaced by Emma. 5 words. 5 straightforward words that had the force of a physical punch. In fact, I looked to make sure I wasn't bleeding. Something that awful must undoubtedly leave a mark. You're not serious, I muttered. That's crazy. You can't just... Half of this wedding has already been paid for, Mom interrupted abruptly. Jake's parents had covered half of the cost. All of this is scheduled and paid for. Just because you're throwing a fit doesn't mean we're going to toss away all that money. With every syllable, my voice got louder. In my bed were my sister and my fiancé. Piper, how is that a tantrum? She refused to share my toys and groaned as if I were a child. You must mature and quit getting so worked up over everything. These things do occur. The line died. Not much of the night comes to mind. I am aware that I wept till my eyes were dry. My throat was sore from screaming into my pillows, I knew. My body physically reacted to the betrayal by throwing up twice, as I know. I was still dressed from yesterday when the early sun found me curled up on the bathroom floor. Even though my phone had been vibrating intermittently, I was unable to glance at it. My cousin Sarah's name finally appeared on the screen at approximately 9 in the morning. Piper. She spoke hesitantly. I just hung up with your mother. She hesitated, and I could hear her straining to speak. She has been phoning all members of the family. I felt sick to my stomach. What is she saying? Jake broke up with you because he fell in love with Emma, and she's telling everyone about it. She claims that everything was quite adult and polite. However, you're not managing it effectively. Sarah lowered her voice. The wedding is still going on. They are telling everyone. Just with Emma. Rather. I forced myself not to throw up again by closing my eyes. What else? Everyone is being told not to get in touch with you for a time. They claim you're acting improperly, and that you need some time to think things through. I leaned against the wall and felt the coolness of the restroom tiles against my forehead. Everyone in my family was against me. In their perverted story, my parents were portraying me as the bad guy. They were isolating me while shielding my sister, my betraying, unfaithful sister. That morning, I was filled with rage, but not the destructive type. On the floor of that bathroom, I made my choice. They wouldn't get the thrill of a controversy from me. I wouldn't yell, weep, or plead. Just like they had wiped me out of their life, I would vanish from theirs. Before Karen, my supervisor, had even taken her first cup of coffee, I entered her office the following morning. I have more work to do. Despite my fatigue, I stood up straight and informed her, the hardest thing you've ever worked on. All of them are what I desire. She looked at me over her spectacles. You're already carrying the entire burden, Piper. Additionally, there is no wedding after the wedding. I need to be busier, so I cut her off. Much busy. She must have been persuaded by something in my face, because she unlocked her drawer and took out a big file. The Thompson story. No one has been able to figure it out. If you desire it, you can have it. That weekend, I discovered a new flat, a little apartment on the other side of town. My phone number has been updated. I poured myself into my job and blocked all of my family members on social media, as if it were the one lifeboat amid a sea of agony. The Thompson story. In 2 weeks, I mastered it. The project for Impossible Miller was finished 1 month ahead of time. I overcame every obstacle Karen threw at me. I studied our competition as if my life depended on it, worked 14-hour days, and attended online classes at night. The only thing that prevented me from thinking about Emma and Jake and how they were likely living their happily ever after at the home was my job. We had intended to tell everyone how awful their oldest child was and how my parents were presumably spoiling their nice kid. A year went by. I was given the position of senior manager, director of operations for another year. I became the youngest vice president in the history of the firm by the 3rd year. My pay increased threefold. I purchased a stunning apartment in the heart of the city, the type of place Jake and I used to dream of when we passed it. However, I purchased it using my own funds, and I experienced an intense sense of pride each time I entered those doors, which was unrelated to anyone else. My initial travels were short weekend visits to local towns, followed by longer journeys to Paris in the spring, Tokyo in the fall, and the Greek islands in the summer. I shared pictures of everything on Instagram to remind myself of my progress rather than to brag. 3 years. For 3 years, I didn't hear their voices, I didn't have dinner with them, and I didn't know anything about their life other than the one thing I couldn't avoid. Emma was married to Jake. Sarah told me about it in passing during one of our infrequent text conversations, presumably to gauge my reaction. I didn't. I was truly thrilled. Not the sort of contentment I believed I had with Jake, who was all about meeting other people's needs and expectations. This was a deeper sense of happiness, derived from being fully aware of my identity and abilities. Or until my phone rang one typical Tuesday afternoon, I was content. I debated whether or not to answer as I gazed at the unfamiliar number on my phone screen. Perhaps it was morbid curiosity or intuition that compelled me to take it up. "Hi there, Piper." The voice of my mother. "Is that you, my love?" Her tone was so lovely that it made my teeth ache. She was talking as like nothing had occurred, as though we had only spoken yesterday. "What are you looking for?" I spoke in a neutral tone. "Expert." I spoke in the same tone during board meetings. The phony joy in her voice broke a little. "Your father and I must speak with you. Would you kindly come to the house? We've had some serious conversations regarding a variety of topics. Regarding you." I ought to have ended the call. Like the others, I ought to have blocked this number. Rather, I heard myself ask, "What time?" "Around 6 on Saturday. I'll prepare your preferred meal." "All right." Before she could continue, I hung up. The week passed slowly. I put much more effort into my job than I usually do, attempting to ignore the impending arrival. Several times my assistant saw me looking at my calendar, the Saturday appointment staring at me accusingly. I spent an hour getting ready on the day of the event. Hair, immaculate makeup application, and a well-chosen luxury dress. I was going to enter the lion's den with the appearance of someone they could no longer touch. I saw that not much had changed when I drove my new Mercedes carefully through my old neighborhood, but I hardly recognized my parents' house when I pulled up. The place appeared worn out and exhausted. The front stairs needed to be repaired, the paint was flaking, and the garden my mother used to take delight in was overgrown. I made no attempt to knock. It was not a call to socialize. I was struck by a flood of recollections as I entered the house. I wasn't ready for it. The same pictures on the walls, the same furnishings. However, I saw that all of the ones that included me had been deleted, even the vanilla candle scent from Mom. And there they were, all lined up like a distorted image of a family. My parents, who appeared older and more worn out than I had recalled. Jake, who is standing next to Emma with his hand on her shoulder and looks exactly the same, save for a minor paunch around his middle, is standing next to Emma with 2 young children clinging to her legs, one over a year old. I waited for whatever emotion had almost destroyed me 3 years prior, pain, anger, or anything else. However, nothing was present. As inconsequential as the crumbling wallpaper behind them, they were now strangers to me. My gaze swept over my attire, my purse, and my meticulously manicured look. "You look good," she murmured, her words brimming with jealousy. I grinned. "Every tooth. When you don't waste time planning to steal other people's fiancés, you can do amazing things." "Piper." There was that usual ring of dissatisfaction in Mom's voice. "Let's just sit down and have a wonderful supper, please." Not really hungry, but in need of anything to divert my attention from the unpleasant quiet at the table, I picked at the overdone chicken on my plate. The only sounds coming from the kids were those of my alleged niece and nephew. While the older one complained about his piece, the younger one banged a spoon against his high chair. Mom cleared her throat. "Piper, we've been watching your accomplishment. Beautiful pictures you share. That apartment of yours in the center of downtown looks great, doesn't it?" I took a drink of water, not replying. "What about your job?" The vice president was as well. She looked at Emma, who was looking at her dish very carefully. "I'm really delighted with your performance. Why have I come here?" Since I know it's not to discuss my social media posts, I put down my fork. Mom's grin wavered a bit. Before continuing, she moved her food about her plate. You see, recently, things have been a little challenging. Your dad. Dear, why don't you tell her? As he spoke, Dad appeared older than his years. 3 months ago, I lost my job. Changes to the budget after 30 years of employment. At the hospital, I've had to take on more shifts. Just to keep up with the expenses, Mom jumped in. Utilities and the mortgage. Nowadays, everything is so costly. I waited for them to get to the point while maintaining a neutral expression. With Emma remaining at home with the children, of course. My sister was now attempting to wipe something off her smaller child's face when Mom pointed to her. With 2 young children, they are making do on Jake's wages alone. What am I supposed to do with any of this? Even though I could already tell where this was headed, I inquired. Mom's face lit up, as if she didn't hear me, or didn't want to. We reasoned that Emma should get a job because daycare is so costly these days. Additionally, your employment is quite flexible. I was waiting for the joke as I looked at her. It never arrived. Are you... I burst out laughing. I was unable to resist. Is it really your intention to have me watch them? That large apartment of yours? Mom went on with enthusiasm. You could definitely work from home on certain days. The kids conduct themselves perfectly. The 2-year-old decided to cry loudly and fling his sippy cup across the room at that very time. Isn't this a joke? I surveyed the table. Aren't you genuinely asking me to watch my sisters and my ex-fiance's kids? Dad cleared his throat. Then, given your wages, you might contribute to the cost of a qualified babysitter if you're uncomfortable with that arrangement. I reclined in my chair, truly in awe at their foolishness. In order to get me to open my pocketbook for them, or act as a babysitter for my sister's children. They had surprised me, summoned me here, and fed me my mother's substandard food. No, I responded, getting to my feet. Not at all. I'm not going to be your babysitter or your ATM. Piper. Mom is worried. The mask came off, exposing the rage inside. You are so self-centered, how dare you? Following everything that we have done for you. The plates rattled when Dad slapped his fist down on the table. You avaricious, ungrateful girl. While your sister can hardly afford diapers, you sit there in your fancy apartment, dressed in fashionable clothes. I have nothing to do with my sister's financial circumstances. My voice was frigid as I spoke. 3 years ago, you all made your decisions. She was your choice. He was your choice. You were pretty clear about your allegiances. You must now live with those decisions. Them shouts followed me down the driveway as I stepped out to the sound of them yelling. Jake was sensible enough to keep quiet, but I could hear Emma complaining about her kids and my parents calling me every possible name in the book. That should be the end of it, I thought. I was mistaken. My phone began exploding with alerts the next morning. A long tirade against her cold-hearted daughter who had forgotten her origins and deserted her struggling family in their hour of need had been posted on Facebook by Mom. The comments began to pour in right away. How could she treat her own sister with such cruelty? The unfortunate infants are in need of their aunt. People are changed by money. These were from family members who were aware of what had transpired 3 years prior. Those who had witnessed the entire scenario. Nevertheless, they continued to add, letting me know in private messages that I needed to move on and support my family. They were all blocked by me, each and every one, aunts, uncles, cousins. One by one, they vanished from my social media accounts. I made no effort to justify or explain myself. Long ago, they had made their decision. My family wasn't finished, though. My assistant interrupted me in the middle of a meeting with our largest client, appearing to be in a panic. I apologize for disturbing you, Miss Parker, but your family is in the lobby. Your sister is accompanied by 2 weeping kids. Additionally, your parents insist on speaking with Mr. Davidson. I hurried to the lobby after apologizing to my customer. Sure enough, there they were, Mom and Dad creating a fuss at the registration desk as Emma stood there with both kids who were screaming their heads off. People were looking at each other. There were phones out recording. We insist on speaking with the person in charge, Dad was yelling. This is not how she should handle her family. We'll wait and see what her boss thinks. Marcus, the head of security, was already approaching the scene as I approached him. This building is off limits to certain individuals. I was explicit in my statement. Please take those off. Marcus formally escorted them out of the lobby, and I watched. The marble floors reverberated with their cries. Then he returned to me with a worried expression. Miss Parker, do you want us to contact the police? I straightened my jacket and said, no. Just confirm that they are listed as forbidden. Under no circumstances are they to be permitted inside the building. They continued. They managed to get my new address somehow. I returned home one evening to discover them camping outside my building's entrance. Emma was there with the kids again, using them as emotional blackmail. Behind other inhabitants, Mom and Dad attempted to push their way in. Until you assist your sister, we will not depart. I called, and Mom yelled. Establishing security. After that, they began to show up at random hours, beating on my door and yelling through it about my terrible character and family responsibilities. I began taking other routes home, putting my schedule away, and constantly checking my back. It was when they started contacting my coworkers and business partners that I finally snapped. I'd been attempting to manage it on my own, hoping they'd ultimately give up, but they kept increasing, rather than retreating. I approached my cousin Sarah, who had been impartial throughout it all, for a recommendation over the phone. She said, I know a great lawyer. She deals with restraining orders, family problems, and other matters. Michelle Torres is her name. Michelle ended up being just what I needed, tough, realistic, and totally unaffected by family strife. She organized everything for me. Screenshots of every message, security footage from my building and office, witness accounts from my coworkers in Dorman, copies of their posts on social media, records of all their attempts to get in touch with me after I told them to stop. As we got ready for court, Michelle clarified that we were requesting a restraining order. It will be illegal for them to approach you, your house, or your place of employment. Mail interaction via digital, physical, or third-party channels. Additionally, we are asking for $15,000 in damages for reputational harm and emotional distress. I had no idea what it would be like to see them in court. Under the fluorescent lights, they appeared smaller or less menacing in some way. For once, Emma had left the children at home, yet she still managed to cry when called upon to testify that their defense was inadequate. All they wanted to do was assist their daughter in getting back in touch with her family. They were concerned about me. They just wanted me to see my nephews. It did not impress the judge. The evidence of harassment is clear and substantial, he said in his ruling. The restraining order is granted in full. The defendants are to have no contact with the plaintiff through any means, direct or indirect. The court awards the requested damages of $15,000. This is absurd. Mom jumped up screaming. We're her parents. We have rights. You ungrateful trash, Dad shouted at me. Emma dissolved into hysterics, wailing about her children again. The judge's gavel cracked like a gunshot. One more outburst, and I'll hold you all in contempt. Furthermore, given your behavior in my courtroom, I'm adding a $5,000 fine for each defendant. 6 months have passed since then. The restraining order works. They can't come near me, contact me, or post about me online. The damages and fines struck them hard financially. But according to Sarah, I make an effort to avoid thinking about them at all. I don't know what they're doing now. I don't know if Emma and Jake are still together. If the kids are growing up happy, if my parents have learned anything from all this. And the beautiful thing is, I don't care. I wake up each morning in my peaceful apartment, go to my job that I love, and live my life on my own terms. They say living well is the best revenge. But I'm not even interested in revenge anymore. I'm just living well. And that's more than enough.
Story 3. My grandmother's enchantment in her small kitchen captivated me as a child. The smell of freshly made bread and pastries filled our little apartment every morning, attracting neighbors like moths to a flame. The most basic ingredients could be transformed into creations that delighted everyone who had the good fortune to taste them by her skilled and worn hands. Do you recall this, Emma? Knead dough with rhythmic precision, she would frequently repeat. There is more to good meal than just flavor. The goal is to make memories. A treasured recipe book with her handwritten notes and secrets was left behind, and her words continued to resonate with me long after she went away. Even though I was only 16 at the time, I already knew what I wanted out of life. After graduating from culinary school 10 years later, I worked in a variety of bakeries for many hours. My dream fund grew with each paycheck, bringing me one step closer to starting my own bakery. It was not an easy road. Double shifts left my feet aching, my hands raw, but I didn't falter. I saw something. I met James at that point. He entered the bakery where I worked on a rainy Tuesday morning, looking for cover from the rain. He had a disheveled appeal from his askew tie and wetsuit, but his smile was the focal point of the room. "Whatever has a wonderful scent." He raked a hand through his damp hair and muttered, "I'll take two." I had just taken my famous croissants with lavender honey out of the oven. I put one on a platter and remarked, "You're in luck. The home has the first one." He chewed into it. His eyes widened with joy. "This is incredible. Tell me you're not married, please." I chuckled at his audacity. "Does it mean you're asking me out?" "Only if it's functioning," he smiled in response. Yes, it was. James was courteous, encouraging, and truly interested in my dreams, unlike anybody I've ever encountered. Unlike others, he didn't think my ideas to start my own bakery were unrealistic when I told him about them. Rather, he provided encouragement and insightful questions. Our romance took off right away. After 6 months, we were talking about getting married. Everything changed when I got to meet his family. James's mother, Patricia Chen, embodied high culture and old money. I felt out of place right first because of her well-manicured hair, fine clothes, and arrogance. She used her position as the property manager of one of the most prominent shopping malls in the city, Crystal Mall, as a weapon. So she began, drinking her wine at our first supper together. "Did you work as a baker?" "Yes," I responded quickly, trying not to be alarmed by her. "I've been putting money down to start my own bakery." The harsh sound of her laughter pierced the room. "Oh, sweetheart, what percentage of small businesses fail within the first year, particularly right now, James? You must be able to assist her in locating something more practical." Squeeze my hand beneath the table, James. "Emma is so skilled, Mom. She is skilled at what she does. She does, of course," Patricia answered with a condescending smile. "However, wouldn't it be preferable to have a wife who is able to go to board meetings and charity events? Someone who is compatible with our world?" I didn't answer, but her words hurt. Robert, James's father, swiftly shifted the topic, which I later found out was his go-to strategy for avoiding conflict. 6 months later, James and I were married in a modest ceremony, in spite of Patricia's contempt. Patricia was disappointed at every opportunity, since it was not the lavish event she had imagined. I was secretly pursuing my ambition of opening a bakery when I had a fortuitous encounter with well-known real estate developer Marcus Sterling. Modify everything. I'm impressed. Amazing. My vision and business plan. Marcus offered to invest in my bakery, giving me the money to start a high-end bakery and cafe idea with space for expansion rather than simply a modest shop. Patricia worked at the Marcus and Crystal Mall, which neither James nor Patricia were aware of. She threw out my application for a spot as soon as it came over her desk. "Here's a bakery," she sneered. "This is not a roadside kiosk. This is a posh mall." She was unaware that Marcus had already given his approval for my tenancy. Her denial was a trivial formality. Construction of Sweet Heritage, located in the center of Crystal Mall, started 2 weeks later. When Patricia learned that her veto had been overridden, her rage was evident. She could do nothing, though. The night before the official opening, she paused at the look of smugness and contempt on her face. "Don't expect James to pick up the pieces when this fails, and it will fail," she added. Her voice was icy. With a grin, I suppressed the truth. "Patricia, I appreciate your concern. Would you want some coffee? The machines are being tested." Sweet Heritage welcomed a throng of excited patrons when it opened its doors the following morning. The sophisticated decor demonstrated the ideal fusion of history and contemporary, and the air was filled with the aroma of freshly baked pastries. We sold out before midday, and we started receiving great accolades from culinary reviewers. The bakery's success was greater than Patricia's displeasure, but I couldn't help but feel a little triumph when she hurried off that morning without telling Marcus about it. It wasn't only about disproving her. I wanted to prove myself correct. My grandmother's battered recipe book was in my apron pocket as I stood in my dream. I knew this was only the beginning. At the monthly tenant meeting of the mall, the situation escalated. Patricia had planned it for our peak morning hours, so I had to decide whether to attend or supervise the breakfast rush. I went to the meeting and grudgingly assigned Sarah to run the store. Patricia was saying as I slipped into a seat, "As you can see from these charts, there are now issues with foot traffic in the North Wing, certain establishments." She hesitated, her gaze latching on May Air, generating congestion that frustrates our more established tenants. The boutique on our next door spoke out quickly. "In fact, we've seen a 30% increase in sales since Sweet Heritage began. While they wait for their orders, their customers shop." Through the room, there was a ripple of agreement. Patricia's expression became tense. Well, she gave it another go. "There have been concerns concerning smells. Do you mean the aroma of freshly baked bread?" Someone laughed and broke the silence. "It's amazing. It makes the entire mall feel cozier, according to my consumers." "What about Patricia?" Marcus, who is calm, interrupted her from the back with a firm voice. The proprietor of the mall had been watching in silence. "We've heard enough, I believe. Mall traffic has increased and Sweet Heritage has surpassed expectations. Maybe we ought to concentrate on more urgent issues." Patricia's lips were pushed when she sat down suddenly. She cornered me in the corridor following the meeting. She screamed, "I don't know how you fooled everyone, but this won't last. You're not worthy of my son or this mall, Mom." She was surprised by James's voice. He had come to have lunch with me. Patricia softened instantly. "James." "Sweetheart, I was simply worried about how much stress Emma must be under managing a company like this. You must want her to spend more time with her family." "Your constant interference is the only source of stress I experience," I answered calmly. "You dare?" Patricia snapped. "My son's pleasure is all that's on my mind." "No," James interrupted in a caustic tone. "You're considering yourself. Emma has created something amazing. Why are you unable to just assist her?" Well-timed tears sparkled in Patricia's eyes. "You've turned against me, I see. A mother and her son are strained by what sort of woman? The sort who's altering your entire mall," Marcus replied as he walked over to Patricia. "Now my office." We saw them leave. James gave a headshake. "Emma, I'm so sorry. I had no idea she was being that terrible." "You're not to blame," I said, although I kind of wanted he had noticed sooner. Before I could continue, Sarah hurried up, panting. "The review by Emma, the food critic, is now available." The review exceeded our expectations. Tremendous acclaim for our creative dishes, excellent service, and a friendly environment. By the evening, we had more clients than ever before, including several well-known food bloggers. Patricia didn't show up at the mall for several days. Gossip suggested to extended meetings with Marcus. I remained silent, awaiting the appropriate time. It happened at a family supper on Sunday night. Patricia insisted on hosting so that certain alterations could be discussed. "Cryptic," she remarked. It was a stressful lunch. As Robert engaged in awkward small talk, Patricia picked at her food. She cleared her throat at last. She started by saying, "There have been developments at work." James scowled. "What's happening?" She spoke in a tense voice. "Mr. Sterling is making organizational changes. A new property manager with new ideas is being brought in by him." "What?" James cried out. Patricia said sourly, "But it seems like you've been managing Crystal Mall for years." "Someone has convinced them differently. Someone will recognize the possibility of something greater," I said quietly. Allies looked at me. "What are you saying?" Robert inquired. I opened Sweet Heritage after taking a deep breath to regain my composure. Marcus and I met during a lecture. He saw potential in my ideas, not just for a bakery, but for modernizing retail spaces. Patricia laughed sharply. "You have big ideas and are a baker." I passed a folder over the table and responded, "Yes. These are proposals I've worked on with Marcus for over a year. Suggestions for making Crystal Mall a contemporary attraction." James's eyes widened as he opened the folder. "Public areas and festivals throughout the year." "Amma, this is incredible." "Absurd," Patricia sneered. "Marcus would never." "I've done so already." As Marcus entered the room, Patricia's face was devoid of color. Well, I didn't, Mr. Sterling. Marcus said that Emma controls 51% of the mall segment of Sterling Retail Properties, which includes Crystal Mall. The room exploded. Patricia looked astonished. Robert's drink suffocated him. It isn't feasible, Patricia sputtered. In just 1 year, Emma has increased income by 40%. Marcus said that her tactics are changing the retail industry. Patricia said, "Are you taking over?" "No," I answered firmly. "For our expansion, you have been elevated to the position of Regional Operations Director. I also said that I'm assuming we can collaborate professionally." Patricia's astonishment gradually gave way to reluctant acceptance. "I could have miscalculated you." "You certainly did," I said. "So? What are you going to do now?" Squeeze my hand as we walked away, James. "I ought to have defended you earlier." "Yes," I said with a smile, "but what happens afterward is what counts." A silent contemplation descended upon me as we drove home. Patricia had been humbled, but I still had unanswered questions. Would her sudden acceptance of me last past the effects of the situation? What would that imply exactly? Because it had been prompted not by real change, but by necessity. The following day brought further difficulties. My everyday contacts were changed as word spread about the management changes in the mall. A few workers gave me respectful greetings. Others sent out tense looks that suggested they were afraid of what lay next. Yet beneath the surface, there was a burgeoning energy, the buzz of something fresh and promising taking shape. When Patricia returned, she had taken a week to come to terms with the turmoil. The enthusiasm for the new projects was unexpected. However, it appeared that she was more driven to prove herself to Marcus than to embrace the goal. It was progress, though. She made an appearance at Sweet Heritage before daybreak 3 weeks later. Uncertainty softened her normally perfect stance, and her high-end purse appeared more like a protective barrier than a fashion item. "We just need to talk," she said. Despite being wrist-deep in commando, I pointed to my office. 5 minutes. She waited, calmly observing while I finished the delicate laminating procedure. By the time we sat across from each other, the tension had deepened. Her gaze strayed across my office's shelves, stopping briefly on my grandmother's cookbook. "I am able to..." She started by going over the plans for expansion before measuring the successes. "The demographic data for the suburban locations is impressive." I gave a nod. "Thank you." I waited for her to speak what she had truly come to say, so I said nothing. The pearls around her neck caused her fingers to worry. She spoke at last, her voice faltering. "I must apologize to you." I didn't answer right away. I wanted to listen to her. "When James presented you to us, I was biased. I thought the person I saw wasn't mine. I believed it might hinder my son's progress. I was completely mistaken." I was surprised by her openness, but I just asked, "And now?" "Now I see someone with vision and character. Someone who picked Grace over me and used every chance to get revenge. You've created something truly remarkable, and I was totally wrong about you." I crossed my arms and reclined in my chair. "And why did you decide against it?" She answered quietly, "You did. Your behavior, your fortitude, and this location. Isn't it more than just a bakery? It is a dynamic illustration of what retail may develop into." "That's the plan," I said. "Transactions are no longer the only aspect of retail. Building relationships and experiences through storytelling is the goal." Her gaze strayed to the recipe book again. "Almost myself," she replied, referring to the morning buns. "Indeed, they make me think of the ones my grandmother made. Years ago, I misplaced her recipe. I took the book from the shelf and stood there. Do you want to witness the manufacturing process?" Her gaze expanded. "Tears are forming at the edges. You'd share that with me. Recipes from the family are meant to be shared." "We have to start there if we want to make this work," I said. Patricia Chan wore an apron for the first time at the Sweet Heritage kitchen that morning. Her first morning bun efforts were far from flawless, uneven filling, asymmetrical forms. However, her smile was real and unguarded as she bit into her first creation. Patricia's early morning baking activities became a familiar sight during the ensuing weeks. After being stunned at first, the renters started to accept the concept. Slowly but surely, Our personal connection blossomed alongside our professional one. A few months later, during the second Sweet Heritage location's grand opening, Patricia was showing her pals from the country club how to make croissants. Marcus, who was observing a scene, smiled and nudged me. Never imagined I'd see the day. Honestly, I said, neither did I. Within a year, 5 other locations opened as a result of the successful expansion. Each one embraced Patricia's operational experience while capturing the essence of the original sweet tradition. Food bloggers began to speculate endlessly about the morning buns, which are now a signature item. Patricia stayed after we closed the flagship shop one evening. "Emma, I've been thinking about your community idea," she added. "Oh, what if we extended it? Classes in cooking, maybe teaching people how to create their own scamming traditions?" I grinned. That is a great concept, in my opinion. Her hub was unexpected, but warm. "Thank you," she said in a whisper, "for continuing to believe in me." I thought about life's greatest victories, which are frequently mine, and the relationships we create as I drove home. It took more than just establishing a successful company or disproving others to achieve success. Honoring my grandmother's legacy and fostering growth in others, even those who resisted, were the main goals. When I got to Sweet Heritage the following morning, Patricia was already there. "I was thinking," she added, her apron coated with flour, "perhaps we could make something that tells your story or a special pastry for James and your anniversary." "Our tale?" I made a little correction. "The sweet and the bitter." She grinned in comprehension. "Yes, everything." The aroma of new possibilities permeated the air as we worked side by side in the warm glow of the morning sun. It was more than simply a fresh start for the mall or the bakery. It was a fresh start for all of us.